I'm Small Axe, you're a Small Axe, and this is a Small Axe. So, we might as well also realize and admit it that there are colored men and women in this island of fair or brown complexion who will not associate socially with Black men and women, not because of a difference in class, but because of a difference in shade of skin. Fernando Enriquez describes Jamaican society in three basic categories. The first is the Black um, lower classes, and this particular group of people, they make up the vast majority of the people on the island. Then we have the colored middle class. So here we have groups of people who are both of European ancestry and also African ancestry. I would like to kind of make an asterisk here. Despite both authors talking about this during the early 20th century, there seems to be a there's a hole in this particular analysis of the colored middle class, because of just the fact that like there have indeed been Asian indentured servants who were brought to the British Caribbean. And I think that's like an important intervention to just say out loud, even though they're not necessarily represented in both of these primary sources, in this primary source and secondary source. So I just wanted to kind of name that. So, the color middle class in the middle, again, these are people who are of African and European ancestry. And then, of course, we have the tiniest population on the island of Jamaica, which is, of course, the people, at the top of the social, economic, and political hierarchy, who are indeed the people of European descent or the European Creoles who were either born on the island and are of fair complexion or just like straight up white. And of course, like how exactly all these dynamics work, I think it's pretty clear for the folks all the way at the top of the social, political, economic hierarchy, right? Like we know whiteness, they're able to kind of easy breezy, beautiful cover girl right on through life. And through some of the primary sources that I've been able to see, like that has absolutely been the case. And then where it's a little bit more ambiguous is like when you get in between. So that in between, like middle and upper class, and that in between where we're talking about like Black and colored middle class. Like I think that particular, like those particular spaces are interesting because that's where there's just a lot more nuance to think about what it means to um, be Jamaican and be racialized at um, in the space. So, and of course, I just wanted to name that like the job of white supremacy is to continue to maintain whiteness as the just at the top of the socioeconomic and political hierarchy by all means, right? It's supposed to ensure that whiteness continues to reign supreme. Now, um, for those of us under the sound of my voice, like this hierarchy shouldn't sound like brand new. If it is, like, congratulations. But for most of us, this should not sound like a new idea because it's not, right? This, at least reading Henriquez's words, this to me sounds exactly like the plantation system from, the 18th century, right? Now, um, what's interesting, however, is that the same like almost similar articulations of race that we have seen in the plantation society is also just like easily mapped onto how Dr. Enriquez describes the like race in Jamaican society in 1951, and then it's also clearly mapped onto how Amy Bailey is describing race in 1938. So it's clear that the durability of the system is just that, like incredibly durable. Now, of course, it's 2024, and again, it's I feel as though not much has changed in this regard. And so I really wanted to kind of analyze Amy Bailey's words and like really think about this piece of evidence, or this primary source as a piece of evidence that like colorism has been a system that people have been grappling with forever. I feel like when we talk about the system of anti-blackness, I think that it's also important for us to consider that like there needs to be special attention to the system of colorism, because like the colorism does important work in the system of white supremacy, and I think that that should be like analyzed, scrutinized, and highlighted so that we can support our brothers and sisters in helping to dismantle the system in the Caribbean, because it is one that is very, very easy to identify regardless of how old or young you are. And if we can historicize this system, I think that we all would have better tools in order to support those of us who are experiencing the most marginality within our society. And I also wanted to say that, like, one of the things that I find to be the most frustrating thing about this type of, or just looking for this particular system, is that, like, unlike, so hear me out. The way how I notice discrimination like has historically worked in a place like the United States, or other like globally north places, even South Africa, there were clear identifications, like images, pictures, things where you can clearly see that like people are like Negroes not wanted here, or like, you know, this is the Negro water fountain and this is the white water fountain, or, you know, like clear images that like give us an understanding of like um the boundaries of where Black people are supposed to be, so on and so forth. We don't necessarily have that on the books in Jamaica, which makes it a little bit harder for us to navigate and find. And I think that it's important to kind of say as well that while I'm holding space for the fact that like it's pretty hard to kind of find like straightforward information that supports this, I don't want to negate the fact that it does indeed exist, right? So, and because I understand that like it's a little bit difficult to find, or a little, yeah, it's like it's more difficult to kind of navigate, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I think, I guess what I'm getting to is that like there have to be different tools that I employ. So I guess you'll watch me in real time try to figure out what those tools are, because I know that it's there. I just have to be creative in terms of finding that evidence. Um, And also, this is not just antidotal to me, but also Enriquez is someone who I noticed also bumped up into some of the same boundaries in terms of finding primary sources that support this, just the way that Jamaican society has indeed articulated for how many centuries, and especially just like, you know, in the 20th century, you know, if we're seeing these trends, they don't just come out of nowhere. um, so as I come across new pieces of evidence, I want to make an effort to kind of share that here instead of just having everything banked up in my head, and also driving the people in my life crazy about like these things that might seem a little minute. So, in an anthology that Dr. Veronica Gregg put together, it's entitled Caribbean Women, an anthology of nonfiction writing from 1890 to 1980. And in it, we come across Amy Bailey, who I've really been thinking about a lot for the past, I want to say, like, I don't know, 6, 7 months. And she's been interesting because this is not the first or the second time that she has explicitly talked about race in Jamaica. But I find that this particular article is really interesting because, like, you really hear her contend with the system of colorism, particularly. And I want to read the article in its fullness, and then kind of walk through some of the things that I'm thinking about. Um, and possibly maybe I'll read it in its entirety and just like have and just cut to the parts that I think are important. So we'll see how this ends up being edited. Um, And before I move forward, like one of the last things I wanted to say is that, like, Amy Bailey, she describes some anecdotal things that she has personally experienced, that she has witnessed. And and through her own like experiences moving through Jamaican society in the early 20th century, she also like um she makes it very clear that like this is not just something that she's bearing witness to, but this is also something that she notices that other people are experiencing. And like Amy really is someone who has made a lot of different contributions, like in terms of not just writing but social work and education, that has been like an intersection, like a demonstration of intersectional feminism, which encompass both just like her commitment to dismantling the system of white supremacy, and like her commitment to like um taking racial discrimination head on, and also taking on patriarchy, and like the ways in which like we harm black women in society. And so, but I'll get into those other things later. All right. So those who have been writing and saying that race prejudice and color prejudice do not exist in this little island of 4,207 square miles are perhaps quite right. These pretentious evils do not exist. That is too mild and inactive a term. They live and move and have their being in this blessed isle. But why say these things? It is in such poor taste. It denotes such a lack of finer feeling. In other words, it is in bad form. It is setting us against each other and stirring up hatred. This is a type of hypocritical humbug that one hears from day to day or reads in the papers and is asked to believe. And because of this humbug, this ostrich hiding, those who dare to hold aloft the flag of truth and say that race, color, and shade prejudice do exist are pillared and martyred, not only by the upper classes, but by the very ones they are outmost to help. Can anything be more tragic? The angels looking on must verily weep at such folly. Every cause must have its martyrs. Every true patriot of his country must be prepared to sacrifice, and often be sacrificed for the good of the cause he upholds. Must be prepared to receive but little gratitude for what he does. Must be prepared to hear the truth he has uttered twisted by knives to make a trap for fools. These are some of what he must expect. And so it is not surprising that Dr. O.E. Anderson, our former mayor, who is known throughout the island for his fearlessness and candid criticism of policies that are detrimental to the best interests of the island, was forced to resign his seat on Monday, a most unfortunate and regrettable incident. I just want to make an asterisk here. So I read up a little bit about Dr. O.E. Anderson, Oswald Anderson, and he was a black man who indeed was um, the mayor, I believe, of Montego Bay. Um, and he was someone who ran as an independent. He wasn't a JLP, he wasn't a PNP, and he was hypercritical of Jamaica being a part of the Empire of Great Britain. He was someone who advocated for Jamaica's independence. And he was someone who was very explicit about anti-Blackness in Jamaica. And he was someone who experienced um So Oswald E. Anderson, again, he was someone who was very anti-colonial, pro-black, and experienced just the wrath of the angry fair and brown, fair upper class and brown middle class against just the power that they wielded against the black vast majority of the island, and was forced to resign. So, going back to Amy Bailey's discrimination, the cry has gone forth, wanted leaders. But what is the good of leaders without followers? What is the good of leaders if those who are being led cannot and will not unite for principle's sake? Why is there so much disintegration and so little union between us as a people? What is the cause of it? Whence its origin? We might as well realize and admit it that there are white men and women and near white men and women in this country who would like to see every proponent post filled by importations on principle that so long as the post carries a good remuneration, a colored Jamaican should not get it. Of course, they do not call it discrimination. It goes by another name or no name at all. We might as well also realize and admit it that there are colored men and women in this island of fair and brown complexion who will not associate socially with black men and women, not because of a difference in class, but because of a difference in shade of skin. I have been to functions where I've happened to have been the only black woman and therefore an object of curiosity and resentment, nothing more. I could have been alone on a deserted island. I have been to other functions where there are at least 2 or 3 of us black women who make our own conversation among ourselves, viewed objectively. It is all very amusing to say the least of it, and yet they say there is no discrimination and they are all honorable men and women. I feel that so much. Visit with me the King Street stories, the offices, and other business concerns, and see how many black women are employed to serve a public, the bulk of whom are distinctly Negroes. They would have as much a chance in keeping a bucket of ice cream frozen in a very hot place as in getting a job at such places. And the reason? Not discrimination, of course not. But you see, the other clerks, for instance, would object to a black clerk of a sort of jackdaw among peacocks. Don't you know? The public would object to purchasing a yard of cloth or a pair of gloves from a black clerk. The tourists want the kind of clerks they are accustomed to find in stores at home, or as near to that shade as possible. Though when they go to India, they find Indian clerks, or to China, Japan, Japanese, and Chinese clerks. Yet, this is Jamaica and quite different, don't you know? This is the sort of argument one hears, and those who say it are all honorable men. Visit with me the clubs, the churches, the secondary schools, the various societies, and see how many black men and women there are who occupy prominent positions. Go to the church fairs and garden parties and see who have charge of the stalls. Go to the churches and see for yourself that a black man has as much chance of being a minister as Kingston Harbor of freezing. But Brutus, say it not so, and Brutus is an honorable man. The advertisements that read "wanted fair," "wanted white" are all delusions, not by any means true. Every tea shop, every restaurant, every office, every big store makes it its business policy and not to employ black girls. There are a few exceptions, but they but prove the rule. The remedy, of course, lies in our own hands. We, the purchasing public, on whom these businesses depend for substance. Let us unite to boycott the places where we are not wanted. But because there is no unity amongst us, because we are so much so social climbers in one instance, such crawlers in another, we put up with conditions which we could easily change. The fault lies in ourselves that we are underlings. The dark and The dark and black girl is discriminated against socially. If she is foolish enough to enter a beauty contest, she must expect to be ignored. How could she hope to represent Jamaica either locally or abroad? The thinking people in London and Glasgow may wonder how it is that in an island of 90% colored population, a dark or a black girl cannot be found to represent it. But that is their own folly for thinking so. Those who say there is no discrimination in Jamaica, no color prejudice, no race prejudice, are dishonest in thought, for they do not practice what they preach. Those who say that mention of what is a fact stirs up hatred are foolish. Do they expect the eyes of the people must forever be closed? Do they expect that the eyes of the people, do they not know this elementary truth that you hate me if you deny me the right economically and socially to live as well as you do? Well, let them go on in their fool's paradise, but let us others be up and doing to kill this foul thing. Let us cease being cowards, being crawlers, being social climbers, being political sycophants, being sapphire hypocrites. Let us together and stick together as one people. Let us not be used by others as tools for their own ends to the detriment of our own people. Let us stop saying I dare not and say I dare. Let us begin to rise to the heights of which men are capable. At present, we are a breed of little men. Let us be men and women. Now, I think what's so interesting about this is I agree with Bailey in the fact that when there is a discussion of race and anti-blackness, usually the first thing that you hear from people is that no, we don't have a race problem, we have a class problem. I think what's so frustrating about that is that the racism and the classism are inextricably linked. If we just take for a moment and think about the social, economic, and political hierarchy that Henriquez broke down for us at the beginning of this video, that mirrors very neatly the social and political and economic hierarchy of the 18th and 19th century. And so this idea that we just have a problem with capitalism. It's the reason why Black people ended up being disenfranchised on this island is because of capitalism. It's the unfree labor of these people that allowed for a tiny minority of people to hoard so much wealth and power socially, politically, and economically. And so to kind of say that is it's backhanded and it's disingenuous. And I'm so grateful that there's another human being who wrote this on paper, because it's you think these things and when you say them you have this stupid rebuttal. And I'm just grateful that someone out in space and time does agree with my sentiment. I think what's also interesting about this as well is she speaks about two things that I think are really important. Number one, she speaks about businesses in Jamaica being unwilling to hire Black women and girls. And I find that I've heard from elders, I've heard from people who are, who specifically and especially the survivors of British colonialism. I've heard from these people that you couldn't walk into a bank and think that you would get a job there. That was, girl, no. You couldn't walk into certain businesses and think that you can apply for a particular job there. And at the same time, it's like back to my earlier argument, it's like it's so hard to find evidence of this, because again, it's like people were engaging in this type of discrimination, but it wasn't on the books. And then there's no, it's not like people were taking pictures. It's not like people had like these gigantic signs, because the gigantic sign that you couldn't work there was the fact that, like, of all of the colored and white bodies that existed in the space, that was enough of a sign for folks to know that, like, you are not allowed here. So I find that interesting. And I think the only sliver of evidence that I feel like I've been able to kind of like make some traction with is where she explicitly says wanted fair, wanted white. Okay? In that particular like verbiage, I was able to make at least some traction. So that's been interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting too is like one of the arguments that I know so many of us have, and like I'm gonna cite a conversation that I had with my cousin, and like she names the fact that, like, in terms of beauty pageants in Jamaica, that like the vast majority of them are so white and fair and brown and like just usually anything other than black. Now, of course, we've had our like dribs and drabs of like seeing someone who is like unambiguously black, and I'm not talking about like the Yendi Phillipses of the world that are still like I would consider her colored, or fall under the category of color. Like she has like a light complexion. She has the type 3C type of hair. And so even though there's like I feel like, and that's the other thing I want to highlight, and I know there's a video already on my channel, but I just want to say this one more time, is that like when we export the one drop rule from the United States onto spaces like Jamaica and other places in Latin America and the Caribbean, we muddy up the work of seeing anti-blackness for what it is in those spaces. Because yes, while Yendi Phillips would 100% be considered like a black woman, up, down, round and round, on an island like Jamaica, she would be a part of that middle colored classes or colored class. Now, again, like I feel like we see more evidence of folks like her in the space versus and I can't remember her name right now, but I can enter the image of her somewhere right here with her name, and I believe she won like was it runner up Miss Universe? I don't remember, but it was like a huge deal, because like the last time we seen anybody that like looked like this, that like ended up placing at Miss Universe, was like, I don't think ever we had anybody that placed from Jamaica that looked like this in Miss Universe. And the last time we had like a Miss Universe Jamaica that looked like that was like the year after Cindy Briggs Fear won Miss Universe, and people were upset about the fact that like we sent a white woman to apartheid South Africa in order to represent Jamaica, despite the Jamaican government explicitly telling this white woman that like this is not okay. And she went and she found like private funding in order to engage in that pageant and blah blah blah. So yeah, I find that, and the only thing that I feel like with Bailey that I don't know if I disagree or just something that I'm it doesn't sit all the way right with me, is that so much of the onus is put, like I get it that there's power in the people, and at the same time I feel like a lot of the onus is being placed back on Black Jamaican society. And while Black people do have so much power, I think the invisible nature of the system is what makes fighting back so hard. And so, you know, she invites other Black people to participate in a boycott the places that you know wouldn't hire you, right? And like, it probably worked. I don't know. I would probably have to look into evidence of like boycotts in Jamaica and like what that actually looked like in the early 20th century. But I think that this was like a window, or like a nice window for me to kind of open up to find a bit more evidence of like, you know, this particular system. And again, like, and in terms of just thinking about this on a contemporary, like in our contemporary world, and maybe I can make videos about this too. Just like, I've seen so many, like, especially when you think about like dancehall music videos, you know, like even reggae music videos, or just paying attention to some of the people that, like, you know, especially Black, paying attention to like the women that are exalted in like the Rastafarian community, and, you know, places where people kind of espouse these incredibly Black progressive views, and then at the same time still engage in wanting to uphold some of the same power dynamics of anti-Blackness. Yeah, like, and I think maybe my next little project, or my next little thing of like evidence of the system, maybe the next one will be contemporary, and then I'll do another, you know, jump back to the 20th century. But there's a lot of evidence. I think what's also scary is like the evidence of just like how this affects like young children, and like particularly like Jamaican kids, and like how body modification, especially like skin lightening, is something that like so many people feel so compelled to engage in. And what I feel like Enriquez acknowledges in his work, and he talks specifically about one form of modification, and that's like the straightening of like hair. I think the other forms of modification that we don't necessarily like admit is the form of modification that kind of falls under the same category, is like the compulsion to ensure that like Black men have like very low hair, and that you don't see their hair texture, none at all. That is explicitly anti-Black. But I guess I want to leave room in other videos to kind of explore that. But there is a through line, is my point. And I think that's it for now. I'm a small axe, you're a small axe, and this is a small axe. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you soon. Bye.